This is the Marathon Handbook Podcast. I'm joined today, John Kelly of the pod, Alex Sear, and Jasmine Paris, Katelyn
Nice.
Tocci. I knew you'd like that one.
Of
Katelyn.
course.
And who am I, guys? Today we're talking the
Lazarus
Barkley
Lake.
Marathons. I get to be the Lazarus Lake
Very nice.
of the pod.
Yes, of course.
Today. I will do my best to entertain because that guy is a master carnival barker. Today's episode is all about the Barkley Marathons. What is it? How did it come to be? Its history, its madness, why it's such a unique event, why it's become this cult classic and arguably one of the biggest endurance sports events in the world in terms of sizzle and intrigue and social media interest, as well as we'll touch upon this year's event because it's going on right now. Literally as we're recording, the Barkley is in full swing and the runners are dropping like flies. So we'll timestamp things at the end and tell you kind of when we're recording. We're recording this Wednesday afternoon. We held off as late as we could to record so that we could be as up to date as possible talking about this year's race. First things first, guys, for the uninitiated, for those in the running community who have no idea what this event is, we are here to entertain and educate you. And it's like, I feel like it's a red pill, blue pill moment in running when it's like, there's this thing called the Barkley Marathons. Let me explain it to you. And nothing is the same for you after that. Let's unpack this a little bit.
Right.
The Barkley Marathons.
The Barkley Marathons.
The Barkley.
Oh,
First of all,
am I hiding my excitement? I was expecting to be on this pod with one Barkley lover and one Barkley, let's call it hater. And turns out I was right, except I had the people wrong. So like little background for the listeners or the viewers. If you're catching us on YouTube, Michael is the Barkley lover. We'll get to Katelyn in a second,
right.
But it's been about a day and a bit that the Barkley has started. And yesterday morning, I was on a work call with Michael and our founder, Thomas. And right at the end of our call, Thomas's face went blank, and so did Michael's when he heard Thomas says, they blew the conch. To that, I'm like, wait.
Okay.
They did
What
what?
does this
The-
mean?
what? The conch is the thing that the race organizer at the Barkley Marathon, Lazarus Lake, uses to signal that the race will begin in 1 hour. And since then, Michael's been a ghost. So I'm pleased to see that you're here and that you're still alive and somehow you're clean shaven, unlike the real Laz Lake. But this is wild, man. I think of the Barkley once a year when it happens, one of the biggest events in the year. It's like it's a 60-hour event tops. Happens in Tennessee, in the backwoods of Tennessee, in a park called Frozen Head State Park. The hardest of runners who go through this weird application process that we're going to ask Michael about a bit later because he's been there, right? You've been there.
yes.
They race 5 loops if they're successful of each 20 miles. They say it's a bit more than 20 miles and
20 miles-ish.
ish. And to show that they have actually done the 20 miles, they need to stop at certain checkpoints and rip a page out of 13 different books hid in the forest. They need to do 2 loops one way, 2 loops the other way. And then the 5th one can be reversed, or sometimes it's a choice. There are all these particular rules. 20 people have finished this race since its inception in 1986. What is it? More people have climbed Everest. More people have gone to the moon. More people have I know like 3 people who've climbed Everest. More people have gone to the
definitely
moon.
way more people have climbed Everest. More people have climbed K2, which is a much harder mountain to climb than Everest and has a much higher mortality rate than Everest, as an example. Yeah. So it's like, I think this year it's part of the charm and the mystique of the Barkley is like none of this stuff is publicly documented. Now in the social media era, there's been more a more sort of long-term project by Barkley stands to like keep spreadsheets and that sort of thing as to like who's run the race every year, what were their splits for each loop, and so on and so forth. By my estimate is about 400 different people have run the Barkley since 1986. And yeah, only 20 people have ever even finished it. So it's one of the weirdest races for a lot of reasons, which we'll get into. But the main one being you don't win the race, you finish the race, and that's the achievement, which is kind of cool and totally wacko because you'll get multiple years in a row where nobody finishes the damn thing. And I think, spoiler alert, I mean, we'll see, but it doesn't seem like anyone's going to finish it this year. So we're going to get a no finisher year this year, I'd say.
And the reason because of that, right, is because this race director, Lazarus Lake, last year, 5 people were able to finish the Barkley Marathons, and 5 people for him was way too many. So what happens is he makes this race so incredibly difficult and treacherous and complicated to finish that very few people end up finishing the race every year. But 5 people for him were way too many. So he decided, I need to make it even more difficult this year because 5 people cannot possibly finish the following year. So I think he has probably tweaked the course, tweaked something as to where these runners are having a really difficult time getting through it this year.
It's a really interesting aspect of this race that I think is like kind of that makes it's part of the, there's a lot of ingredients to this race, right? This is a special secret sauce. It's got like, well, I've listed 33 things in a story I put together yesterday that outlines the madness and brilliance of this event that makes it quite eccentric and quite different than any other endurance event in the world. And that's one of them, which is it's the opposite of almost any other race that you can think of. It's organic. It's ever shifting. It's a creation in the mind of its race director, like this weirdo dude who's actually not actually that weird in person. Spent a lot of time talking to him over the years, phone calls, chats by the gate in Tennessee. And he's actually a remarkably even keel, sane, kind of low-key guy, but he has got this incredible creative mind and basically has fine-tuned this thing that each year he shifts a few things in a different direction or changes or alters something, adds something, takes something away in order to make it like tantalizingly close to being doable, but just out of reach for the best ultra endurance athletes that show up at the event every year. And that's the brilliance of it, that it's like, it feels like something these athletes can accomplish, but it's just falls out of reach. That's the perfect design. I think if you were to ask Lazarus Lake, what's the best version of the Barkley, he would say, in the end, you get a couple of athletes running the 5th loop and they just can't quite complete it, which is sadistic.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I'm calling myself a Barkley outsider because I've never been there. It's not the type of race that I would jump towards. I kind of don't get it. For the viewers, by the way, here's a weird little Easter egg. Laz Lake is behind me in the YouTube channel backdrop, so I have him on a poster here. But Michael put that poster there. I didn't put it there. So
I took that picture. So
sure. It's incredibly hard and incredibly weird. I think those are like the two things. We didn't mention the registration process. There's no
let's go through this. Let's go through the whole thing. Let's go through the whole, let's talk about everything that makes this. Let's talk about the 33 things. Let's talk about the things that make this race what it is. Let's start with the application process, Alex.
So it's not a money thing from start to finish. So there's no prize money at the end of the race. I should also mention before. But it doesn't cost really anything to sign up. You pay, I think it's $1.60.
That's right.
$1.60. You need to bring the organizer, Laz, a pack of cigarettes. I'm not sure if there's specific types of pack of cigarettes and a license plate. Because he collects them. And again, if you saw that poster, he's got some license plate in the poster. And then there's an essay part, right? Too. You have to basically sell yourself to this man for him to allow you to be in the race, because there's a limit of the number of people who can sign up, probably for safety reasons too, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And there's no
it's a,
lottery. I mean, you can't, like, if you want to run this race, it's not like you can say, I want to sign up and I'm going to put my name in a lottery and then I'll get picked out at random. It's you need to convince him and say, why should you choose me to run your exclusive, incredibly difficult race?
Mm-hmm.
And he has to choose you. There's there's no democracy in this of seeing he chooses who's going to run his race. And based on the essay and the reasons why you have convinced him that you should run it or not. And there are only 40 people at the start line every year who are accepted into trying to begin the race. And as we mentioned, most of them don't even finish one of the 5 loops, which when we talk about the course, you'll understand that a little bit better.
yeah, there's a couple of ways I think it's become known that there's a few fairly guaranteed ways to get into the event. One in particular is he does something called the Barkley Classic every year, which is you run a version of the course. It's shorter. It's during a better part of the season. And the winner of the Barkley Classic, if I'm not mistaken, gets offered an entry into the Barkley proper as well. He does other events, like he does what he calls a backyard ultra, which is this kind of insane looped course where you basically just run equivalent of about a 10K and you've got like a certain amount of time to complete the loop. And it's like last man standing or last person standing type race. Although that's not necessarily a guaranteed entry to win that, but it's, I think, a way to get your foot in the door. But then apart from that, and I've covered this race, I've been there a few times. I've watched it very closely every year. I know quite a bit about the event. And I got to tell you, I mean, I know how to go get a hold of Lazarus Lake, but I wouldn't know how, if I actually wanted to do the damn thing, I'm not really sure if I would know how to go through the application process. That remains quite secretive and it's unclear. There's no website. There's no like, here's where you submit your letter in a certain number of characters to write your letter to the devil, asking him to let you enter hell. Right. Like,
but I wonder if he finds you. I've had 3 people tell me that they've had a conversation with Laz, and Laz somewhat invited them to message him to try out. And you were one of those people, right, Michael? Like he tried to put the bug in your mind.
Yeah, because I mean, I was there covering it as a journalist with no real intention of like, flirting with the event as something I would ever contemplate doing, especially at that time. So I was there specifically kind of documenting the rise and fall of one of its most celebrated and infamous performers, Gary Robbins, the Canadian ultra runner, who I think in some ways put this event on the map with his very dramatic near finish / failure to finish in 2017, which we can get into in a little bit. Because it became kind of like a global event when that happened. And I was there kind of following his journey and writing about that specifically. And in talking to Laz by the campfire, waiting for runners to come in between loops, you've got a lot of time on your hands, just hanging out, talking to people. He got to know me a little bit. One year my wife came with me as well, and we were sort of hanging out, chatting with them. And, he came to discover that I'm mostly a road runner and a marathon runner. And he was kind of fascinated by that. And then at one point he's like, you should, if you're ever interested, you want to give this a shot, just let me know, and it was kind of like, sort of, yeah, it's like talking to the devil, right? It's like a Faustian pact. And it is very intoxicating when you're there. There's a, I don't want to use the word cult like, because it is not, I don't want to place any negative connotations on the experience. It was a super positive experience and everyone there is really nice and really welcoming. And it's a great vibe. Like it's a great, the Barkley family is like a great group of people. And so there was definitely no like cultishness to it. And it's actually very matter of fact kind of organization as well. But it is very intoxicating when you're there. You do start thinking to yourself, like, it's like any of these events, right? You hang around, you watch it, you observe, and you start talking yourself into it. You start wondering to yourself, how far could I get in this?
Could I do
one
this?
loop?
Yeah.
Could I finish a loop? And if you got any pride and ego to you as a runner, you're like, yeah, I can do one. I could do one loop. Anyway,
Yeah.
we'll get into that later because I want to pose that question to you guys. But let's go through this here. So, yeah, it's $1.60 to enter. It only takes about 40 people. It's uncertain how you enter. You got to write an essay basically pleading your case as to why you want to do this damn thing. If you're a first-time entrant, you got to bring the license plate from your place of origin. So you got to go steal a license plate somewhere, I guess, and he collects them. He asks for like a weird donation every year. It's like a pair of socks or like
Oh boy, I forgot to put
or
the
like
pair of socks.
an undershirt,
Mm.
household items like that. Definitely loves to get a pack of cigarettes because he's a chain smoker. And then and then beyond that, when you roll into how the race sort of unfolds, again, unclear what the communication is like if you get welcomed into the fold to be an entrant in that year's event. But there is some correspondence, and you become aware that you need to be in rural Tennessee by a certain time because the race is going to start at some point that week. When exactly that is not defined.
Yeah,
And that's
you have to literally have an entire week of time. And I'm assuming that they know the start day, like within the 24 hours, because you're going to have to be able to organize yourself to be, think of 60 hours is a lot of time for the race. You have to be there at least 24 hours before to do the check-in. You have to give all that time because you're not quite sure when it's going to start. So it could start between midnight on the day that it is allotted for it to begin until midday the following day. And the runners need to just be there at the campsite. They can be sleeping in the middle of the night, but they need to be aware for when you hear the conch shell sound, you know that you have exactly 1 hour to finish getting ready and to get going. So I think that is just, let's just start there. That's a very stressful way to start a race because you don't know exactly when you're going to be starting, if you're going to be able to get a good night's sleep. If not, and even if you are, you're still thinking about starting this incredibly challenging and difficult race. So I don't think you're going to sleep anyway, but I think it just makes it even more stressful not knowing the start time. So I think probably with that correspondence, you have to at least be told within a day in advance, this is the week it's going to be, this is the day it's going to start, but I can't tell you the time.
Yeah, you gotta fly into Knoxville. That's the closest big city, the closest airport. You fly into Knoxville, and then you got to drive. I think it's like about an hour and a half to the closest town is called Wartburg, Tennessee, and it's a fairly depressing little Tennessee town. It's a kind of a town down on its luck. It's got one really crappy motel that I've stayed in a few times.
Shout
It's
out to
probably
Wartburg.
the nastiest motel I've ever stayed in my life. And then you drive into Frozen Head State Park, which is a very large, sprawling state park in the mountains in Tennessee. I don't think it's a very well attended park outside of this weird event. And
Do people go
there's
and
a few.
spectate? Like when you were there as a journalist, did people go and spectate by the hundreds?
No,
Not at all.
no.
It's hard to
You'll
watch, probably.
Yeah, I think they really kind of don't want that to happen. I know that. So there's one of the fixtures of the Barkley is this guy named Keith Dunn, who's a lawyer and longtime ultra guy, and he's been attending the race and kind of helping out with the race and being the sort of like unofficial PR man, social media guy for them. He's like the only guy who reliably tweets out what's going on at the start finishing gate. So the race starts and finishes at a yellow gate, which has become kind of an iconic symbol in extreme sports. And this guy, he's got 3 phones going because the cell reception there sucks. It's one of the reasons why this race has, been so secretive is because you just can't just show up and blast out Instagram live, a live feed of what's happening. It's very rural. Dunn is one of the only people that's producing information on a regular basis,
which is wild.
And
because
yeah,
from Dunn's coverage comes a bunch of other, like we're doing a live thing, like we're doing live coverage, and it does really good on her site, and other media outlets are on it too.
Yeah. And we can get into that in a little bit, but yeah.
It makes it even more tricky to watch because as Michael can probably confirm for us, it's not like you're allowed to be out on the course. You're not allowed to the runners aren't allowed to bring telephones or anything like that. So cameras, they can't take footage of the course. So there's only two places where spectators would potentially be able to be. And that would be at the campsite, which is where your crew is going to be. So it's going to be pretty sparse there as well, since there are only 40 runners. And then at the tower, right, Michael, which is one of the aid stations up at the top where you can see the runners kind of climbing the hill to get to the unmanned aid station. So I think there are the only two places where you're even allowed to be on the entire course.
Yeah, obviously it's mountainous terrain. You're climbing an incredible amount of elevation. If in theory you get through all 5 laps and you run the 60 hours and you complete the well over 100 miles, of course, you're doing an insane amount of elevation, many times Everest over and over again. I think it's at least the equivalent of going up and down Everest twice.
Yep, from sea level.
And you're hitting a few different mountain peaks along the way. And one of the great vantage points and sort of iconic spots is at this water tower, which is up at the top of one of these peaks and looks down onto a section of the course called Rat Jaw, which is just this nasty power line cut, incredibly steep up and down that you've got to go up and down in order to get to that checkpoint that's at the top of the water, where the water station is, where the water tower is. And there's just brambles everywhere. It's brutal. Anyhow, so rituals. Conch shell goes off. That means you got 60 minutes before go time, which in and of itself, like just that is awful when you think about it. Like not knowing the night before, I would imagine one of the biggest, most pressure-filled races of your life. If you're entered in the damn thing, you don't even know when the thing starts. So you don't know when to like forget, like carb loading is basically just pack in as much energy as you possibly can when you have arrived in Tennessee, and then you just like wait for your fate to be sorted out for you. And then the start, there's not an air horn. You don't fire off a starting pistol. The race director, Lazarus Lake, who we mentioned before, likes to pull on a dart, lights a cigarette, and that's the start.
That's
lights
go time.
A goddamn cigarette. Yeah, which is one of the most, poetically ironic phenomenons in all of running. And it's ridiculous. I know some people find it kind of offensive, but it is what it is, as they say.
It's tradition.
That's the tradition.
That's the
start
tradition.
of the race.
That's what he does. And one of my most favorite quirks of this race, which I just think is insane, is a part that reminds me of a scavenger hunt. So
yes,
we're talking about these 5 loops. Okay. Your checkpoint. This is absolutely, you have no GPS watch. Actually, the day before, when you have one day before the race, you get a map. Okay. You're going to get a course map, and that course map is going to give you clues as to where 13 books are hidden. You're also presented with a bib number. So with that bib number, you need to go around while you run this 20+ mile loop, and you need to find these 13 books, which are indicated on the map. Okay. And you need to go and find each book and rip out the page number that corresponds to your bib number. So when you get back down that mountain, you need to have 13 pages of 13 different books, which get checked at the gate by Laz when you get there. And then once you're checked off and you can continue the race, if you're missing a page, you're disqualified and it's over. So if you have all 13 pages of all 13 books from the different checkpoints, you are then presented with another bib. So every time you finish a loop, you get another bib with a new number, because you have to go back to each of those books. And now on the second loop, you need to go back and get the new page numbers out of all the 13 books of the new bib that you have, and so on and so forth. So this adventure race scavenger hunt is what you need to do during each loop, and it's collecting pages from books.
The disqualification part is huge too, right? There's a lot of ways that you can get disqualified for it being such a huge race and monumental moment in your running career. You can take a wrong turn, and that's the end for you. Either you miss a book or you just veer off course and people find out, you're done. You're done. You might be 40 miles into the race, and that's it.
There are no markings. No markings. You have a compass and a map, right?
Yes. Okay. I was going to say you get a compass, right? That's like the only piece of quote unquote tech that you're allowed.
And I mean, I've seen this in past years when there's like, I was there one year covering it when there was really bad weather. It rained sideways. It was freezing cold. It was just a giant mess. And you'd see people coming in after a loop and they've got all the pages, and the pages are like a disaster, and they're like almost impossible to decipher. Right. So it's also, I can imagine just like an absolutely anxiety inducing experience when you find one of these crucial books in the middle of the night, it's pissing rain. You find the page, the book is getting soaking wet. Each book is wrapped in like, in plastic and like put in a Ziploc bag. But still, like you're having to handle these books. And of course the books are, I mean, again, all these like little delicious little Easter eggs that are inserted into this event. The books, Laz historically has gone like and hunted for these books over the course of the year and collects them. And I believe others also donate or give him books as well. And the books have a theme of like, so this race is sub-headline is the race that eats its young. And so the theme of the books are usually cruel and ironic. Like they have titles like, death won't come soon enough and that sort of thing. Yes. Right. So
it's to motivate you.
That's right.
Motivate you while you're running.
But also I think a soggy page or two would be the least of my worries if I find a book in the middle of the night. What do we know about the wildlife out in Tennessee? You got like, there's some animals in there in the middle of the United States, right?
Yeah. And so animals, the fact that you're running in the mountains in the middle of the night, the fact that the weather conditions can be deplorable, particularly up in the mountains at night, all of these factors to me have left me kind of like just totally amazed that no one has ever been seriously hurt that I know of, and certainly not died in this event. In the past 1 year when I was there was very bad fog at the top of one of the sort of like really kind of shelf-like peaks in the mountains there. And a few of the runners, they were just like, they were lost. They had no idea where they were. Mm-hmm. They couldn't get their bearings. And then all of a sudden they realized they're like at the edge of the mountain. Like they're like right there at the edge.
That's terrifying to me.
Could have taken a terrible fall. And that has never happened. And I'm kind of amazed that it's never happened. It's, I guess, a testament to the quality of the athletes and the quality of their like orienteering skills and the care with which they comport themselves on the course. Because like, I'm baffled that nobody's ever been seriously injured that I know of, at least. Yeah,
it's a tough thing. It's an ego thing. A tough thing to do to your ego when you're finished one loop or a second loop and you tell yourself to stop. Like I feel like that would be the hardest thing. There's probably a good amount of restraint inside of these athletes as well to know when they've done enough, because it's not anyone who goes there, and almost nobody that I knew of, i.e. no professional runner or high profile runner outside of like the deep ultra world, has really finished the Barkley. Like the people who I thought were going to finish the Barkley did not over the years, right? You mentioned Gary Robbins, Michael, who had a pretty high profile as a runner before the Barkley. Courtney Dauwalter, who's like your obvious, was Katelyn's girl, who when she did it, we thought, she's obviously going to finish it. She's arguably the best ultra runner in the world. Mike Wardian's another one that we talked about a little bit before the podcast. So he's more a guy who I would see myself in. He's faster than I am. He's got a 2:16 marathon. Is that what he's run?
Yeah, I think he's run 2:16 or 17. Very accomplished distance runner.
Did not finish.
Didn't even finish a lap, I don't think.
Yeah, not even the first loop. And you know what my question is? This is leading to a great question that I have for you guys. Who is the Barkley Marathons for? Because we're looking at a super fast marathoner and an ultramarathoner, someone like Mike Wardian, Courtney Dauwalter, the GOAT of ultramarathon running. If they were unable to finish a race or finish a loop and be successful at this race, with all of the different factors and all of the different skills that you need to have, who is the perfect person, or who is the perfect runner, or I wouldn't even say runner, athlete, endurance athlete in general, who would be able to finish this race?
I mean, I think you nail it on the head when you said it doesn't have to be a runner necessarily or primarily. I think someone who excels on Survivor would probably do better than someone who went to the Olympics in general.
Or not even Survivor, because Survivor, like, one of the weird things about Survivor is it's like it's got this huge like social development element to it, right? Where it's like you're put into small groups and you have to kind of work the political game within your group. This is more like that reality series called Alone, where you're just dropped off in like the Canadian North and you have to survive on your own and in the wilderness for 30, 60, whatever, however many, 90 days. I think if you do well in like wilderness survival type stuff, I think you would do okay in the Barkley. Although that said, one year there was I believe the guy was like an ex-Navy SEAL who showed up and he didn't finish. He got, I think he may have got through what they call the fun run, which is 3 laps. Completing 3 laps in under 40 hours, you get to have finished the fun run.
Sounds super fun.
Indeed. And 40 hours of joy. But this is a person who, presumably has been trained in extreme survival situations under extreme duress, theoretically in combat, and didn't make it through all 5 laps. So who is this race for? We can talk about the 20 finishers. I think there's sort of a bit of a profile that emerges with the 20 finishers of the Barkley. The 2 standouts, I think, would be the 2 men who have finished it the most number of times, and that's Jared Campbell, who has finished it 4 times, and John Kelly, who has finished it 3 times and is, as at least we're recording, is running it for the 8th time and trying to finish it for a 4th time as well. And then obviously another standout character in the Barkley lore is Jasmine Paris. We mentioned off the top, Katelyn, who's the first woman and the only woman to have ever finished this event, who's a very accomplished, like extreme ultra type athlete outside of her accomplishment of finishing the Barkley. So if you take those 3 people as your prototype or your profile for, dominant Barkley athlete, like as you said, Alex, we're not talking an Olympic marathoner here. We're not even talking Katelyn, somebody who is going to win the UTMB, for example. We're not talking Courtney Dauwalter here. Because maybe if she tried the Barkley 5 times in a row, she might get the hang of it. But I think there's a personality type, a skill set that is not purely amazing endurance monster.
I do have some friends here that have done adventure racing. So there's about 4 people in a group, and they tackle these incredible races where they have to, do kayaking, and then they have to, do hiking and running and just all of these extreme sports. But the thing is, so I think that it would be someone who is more on that end of things, who go on these adventures for days and days, almost 4 or 5 days a week time. And they also have to navigate themselves through the races. However, this is a group of people who work together. So you have someone that's good at navigation, you have someone that's stronger biking, you've got someone, and even though they have to go together, I think they work off each other with their strengths. And I think that person who is really good at orienteering is key. I think that would be a person who runs Barkley and is able to succeed at it cannot just be strong and have a ton of grit. They also have to have a lot of skill, because you have to be able to work your way through those woods with no markings, no GPS, the map and the compass. So you have to have a really good sense of direction, I think, right off the bat.
Yeah, it's like a Venn diagram between like the perfect orienteering person and also a runner, because there are time limits, right? You could probably find some people in the world who could walk the thing and they figure it out, but they can't finish 5 loops under 60 hours, right? Because Michael, when you were there, you ran part of the course. Like, there's running involved. It's not a crawl and it's not a hike. Like, there is some running.
You can move. And I think if it were just one 20, 25, whatever it is, mile loop to accomplish, if you're just served up one that you had to do over the course of a day, the course of several hours, you could grind. I mean, you'd be grinding a lot of it. A lot of it is pretty tough sledding, but there's some stretches that you can run. There's obviously quite a bit of elevation, right? It's 60,000 feet. So overall, over the 5. So it is a lot of climbing and then a lot of hard descent. But yes, I have gone for a run in the Bushy Mountain area of Frozen Head State Park, and you can definitely run.
I think it's also gonna have to do with the conditions. So if it's raining a lot and you're gonna have a lot of muddy trails, that's gonna slow you down. If you have a ton of those briars, I don't know how they're going through that terrain. I mean, you obviously can't run through that. You've got to kind of tiptoe around it, or you just say, I'm just gonna cut up my legs and I'm gonna go straight through it. But I feel like there are a lot of parts that are tricky where you need to be careful. And so even though maybe you would be able to run it in normal conditions if the terrain was in a little bit better shape, not just because of the elevation, but because of the actual conditions and the terrain, you may not be able to run as fast as you'd like to.
And then, of course, I mean, let's take a quick break here, but we'll get into, I think we can pivot into some of the other elements that have made this race kind of like a fascination outside of the running world, and has turned it into it's got a cult following now. And that cult following reaches well beyond running, and we'll talk about why after this break. We'll be right back. Last week, I'm skiing with my family. It's March break. The kids off of school. We invite up another family of a kid that's in his class. None of these people are runners. All of them, four people in the family, 6-year-old, 9-year-old, and the 2 parents, they all knew all about the Barkley Marathons, all about it. They'd watched the 2012 documentary that was on Netflix. They've watched other YouTube documentaries about the event. They knew every detail of the event. They were completely fascinated by it. They knew that the race director creator's name was Lazarus Lake, like right off the top of their head. He's like a character in a story for their 6-year-old. They're totally, totally into it. They were introduced to it by a podcast. I think it was an NPR podcast, did like a whole podcast episode about it. The mainstream media over the years has descended on this event and become completely fascinated by it and unpacked it. It maintains this level of, I think, quasi-secrecy, even though there's a lot of reporting on it, and we've got a lot of very intimate glimpses into how this race unfolds. Why is it, do you guys think, that I'm hanging out, talking about life with these people that have no interest in running, and then all of a sudden their eyes light up when it's mentioned that I've been to the Barkley before, and then it turns into an hour-long conversation where they're picking my brain about it?
Oh my God. I don't know, because I've wondered that for years. My deep, dark little secret is every time that I've worked for a running related outlet, I root against the popularity of the Barkley inside of the coverage. And instead I root for the popularity of the marathon coverages to show that there's more appetite for that than some weird, obscure race in the woods. And every year I lose. And the only time in distance running, or maybe, I don't know, call it traditional running, where I can think of a situation that was the same as the Barkleys every year, where people like your friends, Michael, who aren't necessarily runners, know about it and start to talk about it, is when Eliud Kipchoge broke the 2-hour barrier. And all of my friends who did not care about running talked about it. So I've been thinking about why the Barkley has that effect on people. And I wonder if it's because it's every year wading into the unknown once again and once again and once again. The course changes. It's very difficult. Even in the last few years where people have finished it, it still feels like it's on the cutting edge of what's possible for human beings. It's a new challenge. When you compare the Barkley to, I don't know, the New York City Marathon, or more locally, the Toronto Marathon, people know what they're getting. People know what a marathon is. They know kind of how hard it is. They know what a good time is. The fastest man will probably run 2:04 and the fastest woman will probably run 2:21, and that'll be that. And there's no unknown. And so I wonder if that's the case with the Barkley. It's just like, it's just hard enough. It's just weird enough. It's a moving target. Most people cannot figure it out. Like, is this what it is? Is it the ambiguity of it?
I think that it also might be that people want to watch other people face these challenges. They want to watch and see what the potential humans actually have. Like, how far can we push the human body? How far can we push the human mind? And I think it's this, if people find these challenges are almost impossible. And so that's something that they want to watch. Like you're saying, they expect people to finish the marathon. They don't expect people to finish the Barkleys. Like, actually, it's a surprise if someone actually is able to finish the race, even do a couple of loops. So I feel that it's also not just the unknown, but the fact that it's pushing human limits, and people like to watch that.
And they can't watch it. That's another weird, and that's another weird irony of this event.
Yeah.
They can't actually observe it. And in fact, it's like it is by design that it is not, there's no live stream. There's no real live coverage beyond the one aforementioned dude, Keith Dunn, tweeting away. And even then, he's doing it in this very coy, like almost, it is purposeful, this purposefully obtuse manner where he doesn't even tell you exactly who the runners are who are participating, or what their names are when they finished a loop. He'll give them like a nickname. And like the one guy he calls like Japanese Laz, or nondescript guy with a funny accent.
Yes.
Or the two French guys. And leaves you, the onlooker, kind of guessing and trying to piece together this puzzle of who's in the event. So in recent years, it's become a scavenger hunt online, where it's, you go on Reddit and you read like the subreddits about where people are mentioning, oh, in my running group in Sweden, we've got a guy who said that he's flying to Tennessee to compete in the Barkley. And then everyone's like, what's the guy's name? And then someone creates a spreadsheet and shares it on Twitter or Blue Sky or whatever now. And you start following along and trying to piece together who the entrants are in the event. You're scouring who's even there. You're scouring previous entrants' social media channels. You're looking at their Instagram. You're studying their Strava to see whether or not they are like, they've peaked 2 weeks ago and now they've tapered. And then, they just posted a run outside the Knoxville airport, which is how we figured out one of the guys was running, because he posted a run in Tennessee the day before the Barkley started. So I think it's this game that has been created, this, as you said before, Katelyn, scavenger hunt that engages the mind. And there's something that's like, it's like conspiracy theories. There's something that like feels like it's knowable and it's right around the corner, and you just need to like find the facts and the evidence to prove that it exists. Right. It's actually a weird, apt analogy is the Barkley Marathons. engaging the conspiratorial mind.
I'm sure
In
they'd
a
love
weird
to
way.
borrow that as a slogan.
Yeah, exactly.
But
Um,
that doesn't happen by accident though, right? Because I feel like
no,
if the Olympics tried to do that, for example, or some meet in the US, it would just be seen as bad marketing. They'd be like,
yes.
what? We got one guy working on our Twitter? That's insane. So
Well, and there's the difference. The reason why the Olympics would do it is money. And the reason why Lazarus Lake and his merry pranksters are doing it is because it's fun.
Yes,
And I
they're just
think
having
that
a
people
good
are reacting
time.
to that. Yeah,
And
because it's
you know,
fun and challenging and nuts.
mm,
You
and he
can take
loves
this too far, though.
yeah, that's true.
you know what? You might be tapping into something. It's real, is what it is.
It's real.
It's real.
Yep.
And I think we're starving for real.
Yeah.
We're starving for real in this context world with a bunch of events that are created for commercial purposes mostly, right? Because that's what governs most things. Content is the same way. There's an ulterior motive to the vast majority of things that exist. It's to elevate a profile. It's to make someone famous. It's to make someone money. And if Laz is doing that, and he is, because now he's like quasi-famous in the running world, he's done it in a very skillful way that doesn't make him seem like someone who's trying to grow a profile. And I know your thoughts on this, Michael, because you kind of have a bit of an admiration for Laz, and you mentioned this in Boston when we were talking about it, when we were in the same room as him. But you think that he's playing 4D chess with some people.
Totally. I think that I've made this comparison before, I think on the podcast, where my take on all of this is, not to get too like literary and hoity-toity, but my take on this is literally his a comp for him would be like Herman Melville, who wrote Moby Dick, and that the Barkley Marathons is the sporting event equivalent of that book of Moby Dick. And I mean that in a sort of I mean that sort of quite literally. Like Moby Dick as a text is a very complex, very modern, almost postmodern construction of a novel. And I think that this event is a postmodern construction of a sporting event or a running event or an endurance event. Not to get too kind of like weird and academic here, but I really do think that this guy is thinking at a higher level. And he's also walking like a real red line with the event every year, because if you make it too hard or too crazy, or you go too bonkers with it, you're going to push it too far and you're going to lose people, right? And he somehow finds a way to walk that fine line of madness and of risking disappointing an audience every year. Because I mean, like last year was a banner year. They had 5 people finish. Jasmine Paris finished. It was a huge global sensation. She's on the BBC. She's nominated for all these awards globally. There's a huge amount of attention. There's this groundswell of support for her. It's very exciting. She becomes like a celebrity above and beyond running. So it'd be tempting to just like try to cash in on that and run it back this year. Bring in some bigger stars, like get friggin' Harry Styles to try the Barkley or whatever, right? Like,
You think Tokyo is hard?
exactly. And he doesn't. Instead, he's like, nah, I'm going to make this event just hard enough this year that no one's going to finish this year, but it's still going to be compelling and captivating. And we're going back to our roots here. It's a lot of Barkley veterans running the event again this year, known big name celebrities in the endurance sports world. And it's sort of like almost like a reset, and that takes an incredible amount of discipline to do that.
Although he's set up a pretty good scenario for himself now, because in a year when many people finish the Barkley, it's awesome and great attention for the Barkley. And then in a year where no one finishes the Barkley because the course is too tough, the Barkley, the course that eats us young, it gets good marketing. See, major marathons don't get that. If you're a fast course as a major marathon, you're a good major marathon. If you have a slow course, it's not so good unless it's historic or it has to be Boston or something else. You put a marathon in the line, You start a new marathon, and if the course is slow, that's just bad for you. You get bad PR.
And we should say, and I think that this race is, you could say it's grown, even though it hasn't literally grown. It's capped at 40 people every year. It's never going to get bigger than that. Who knows if it can grow in terms of its stature and its popularity any more than it already has. But I think it grew in the last 7 or 8 years with the growth of social media and the maturity of social media, because A, it's just beyond reach, and B, there's all these like other quirks and eccentricities. Like, I think initially people were really attracted to the origin story of why the event exists, which we should get into a little bit.
Yeah.
I think it's actually in a weird way, kind of like at this stage in the game, kind of a less interesting element of the Barkley, but it is something that when the documentary first came out in 2012, I think a lot of people were drawn into it because it kind of had this sort of like this edgy element to it. So there's this old prison right next to the park, right? And it's a defunct prison. It's called Bushy Mountain State Penitentiary. It's now closed. It's been closed, I think, since 2009. It's like a Civil War era. Like when you think of like, it's like comparable to like Alcatraz. When you think of like an old, dank, miserable, torturous, max security penitentiary from a crueler time in history, this is that place. It's sort of nestled in the mountains in a valley in the middle of nowhere. And runners have to run through and underneath in the catacombs of this penitentiary and find a book in the sort of like sewer swamp underneath the penitentiary. And
You're
this
really
penitentiary,
selling it.
yeah, I know. It's just, this penitentiary is notable because it housed James Earl Ray, the man who assassinated Martin Luther King. And the reason why this event exists is because at one point, James Earl Ray broke out of this prison and ran around in the mountain area and only made it a few short miles and only survived on his own for, half a day before he was scooped up. And this group of ultra runners, including Gary Cantrell, aka Lazarus Lake, in the 80s mused that they could do better than James Earl Ray in surviving in these mountains. And then they cooked up the Barkley Marathons, which was named after an old pal of Lake's. And that's how they came up with this event.
Back up.
Yeah.
Does Laz Lake have a history as an ultra runner?
He does. Yes.
Did not know that.
But he has not completed the Barkley Marathons, correct?
I don't know. He has not.
No,
he is definitely not. He's not one of the 20 people. He just made it up.
Yeah.
Definitely didn't complete it.
No.
He would probably cackle at the idea of him at any point in his life trying to complete the Barkley. But that is the origin story of this event. I think the neat thing is that this event and its like lore has grown beyond that origin story. But that origin story, I think, really attracted people initially. Okay. So what do you think, Alex? You're sort of the farthest away from the Barkley, philosophically speaking.
Apparently someone here hates it more than I do, but okay, let's go with
Katelyn. Katelyn is she's just sitting back. She's sitting back. She's like, don't bring any attention to me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I don't want to talk about my real feelings about the Barkley because you've got the most to lose because you're
the ultra runner.
Ultra girl. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
You're not an adventure runner.
You're like a politician who's about to say something counter to her own political party and is wondering if it makes sense for you to say this. Whereas I, on the other side of the aisle, can just throw daggers as long as I want.
Go,
That's
Alex.
Right. That's right. So we'll turn to Katelyn in a second, Alex. But first, something I've been long fascinated with is, as you mentioned before, every year the Barkley sucks up all the oxygen, right, for 3 days. It's all anyone can talk about outside of even the ultra running scene. It permeates into the running scene writ large. When you have a year like last year with Jasmine Paris, quest to finish, the first woman to finish, all of a sudden you've got interest from mainstream media as well. You never get that level of intrigue in anything other than, I'd say, Boston, London, New York. I even think this is a hot take here. And I'm sure like somebody who's got very powerful social media monitoring tools could tell me the real answer here. I'm almost willing to say that like the Barkley is more notable than the Chicago Marathon or the Berlin Marathon each year.
Wow.
What's your reaction to that? And how can we as runners learn from the Barkley? Like, what can we do to get these like successes and these wins outside of this weirdo event? Like, how can we turn this? How can we learn from the Barkley? I guess would be my question.
Yeah, after grumbling about it every year since like 2017, I've made peace with the fact that it's the second part of your question that's the useful one. The earlier part of your question is like comparing apples to oranges. I've come to believe the Barkley's is not high level distance running. It's different.
Yeah, totally.
Running matters to being good at the Barkley, like running matters to being good at soccer. It's like one thing that you can do that will help you do this thing, but it's a whole different sport. So it's apples to oranges. Why is it that the Barkley's elevated every year and these running events that we consider great aren't necessarily? I think it's as he sighs once again, I think it's the story. Because I've caught myself thinking the same thing about Boston year after year, especially last year when I went to Boston and did all of the things around the marathon except for running the marathon and saw the magic in the city. And I wondered, why is it that Boston is so elevated and Chicago, a couple hours west, is not as a marathon? And I think it's a storytelling. It means something. It means something to the people who do it, and even to the people who don't do it. The people who don't do it will tell others that their son or their brother or sister or wife did the Boston Marathon, and it like has some weird cultural cachet that I'm not sure where it came from, and I think it's history and I think it's a story. But for me to figure this out for real, I need to understand what exactly happened in the last like 10 years that made the Barkley rise so much, because I became aware of the Barkley I think in 2017 or 18. That also coincides with me getting more on social media, just like everybody else, and me caring more about running. And so I'm wondering if there's a confounding factor there. But Michael, you've been in the running industry since before then. Was there like a shift? Like did something happen in around 2017, 2018 that just made people care about the Barkley more?
I think there's been three key moments in the history of this event that heightened its profile. The first being the documentary that came out 2012, 2013.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a sleeper success, an unexpected success for Netflix. So if we're going back to 2013 with Netflix, that's early stages for that platform as a streaming service. And we think now about Netflix as being this like, omnipresent, dominant technological media platform in our lives, right? But 10 years ago, 12 years ago, it was a struggling, well, probably not at that point struggling, but it had been a struggling company that was literally mailing you DVDs and having you send them back after you watched the movie.
Oh, that's right.
That's it. Yeah. Netflix was a direct order mailing service so you could watch physical media. Exactly.
Yeah, that's right.
And they did this hard pivot into streaming very early, which was a huge risk at the time because the technology wasn't quite there. And obviously the rest is history. And the Barkley Marathons documentary that was done about the 2012 running of the event which had a couple of finishers, including Jared Campbell, was this weird, unlikely success. They picked it up, they put it on the service because they needed content. They didn't have many documentaries at the time. I don't think anyone even really knew how popular documentaries and sort of like quasi reality TV programming, unscripted, as they call it in Hollywood, programming would be for streamers. But this was like, in the history of streaming services, like a little bit of a like kind of like one of the real pinnacle moments, I think, for streaming. So there was that. And that, I think, put the event on the map, and people were like, what is this event? And then Twitter was growing massively at that time in 2012, 2013. And so people turned to social media to follow the event at that point. And then the big bump came, I'd say, in 16, 17, and 18. And it wasn't in 16. It was 17. It was that year that Gary Robbins came in 2016, and it was this thing where there was a lot of talk that this guy, as we've discussed before, this guy was like the profile for an athlete that's going to dominate this event. He's just going to show up. He's going to set all kinds of records. He's going to crush it. He's not going to finish it. He's going to blow it out of the water. And he got just leveled by the course in 2016, came back quite humbled, much more prepared. And then there was a very dramatic finish where he very famously missed finishing by 6 seconds over 60 hours. Now, it turns out the caveat is he actually got lost in the course and would have been disqualified anyway because he came into the finish in the opposite way he was supposed to. But it created this like huge dramatic moment that just like ricocheted around social media at a time when I think Twitter in particular was super duper popular. And I think people were just totally taken by this compelling scenario. Right?
I
like
choked
6
up
seconds.
big time watching that finish. I was like, I had tears in my eyes for him. I could feel it. I was just so sad for him.
I was actually like Googling to try to figure out some of the details of it. I was there, and I was like standing there watching this poor man collapsed on the ground at the gate and being just like this horrible vampiric journalist. Because I'm like, digital SLR in one hand, iPhone in the other hand, photographing, videoing, and then also just being like, holy shit, this poor man, right? At the same time.
As he's breaking down. Yeah.
And I found a story on the CBC, which is the national broadcaster and news site in Canada, where I was interviewed in the aftermath of that event. And I'm quoted in the subhead, which I didn't even remember ever. Never read the news story before yesterday. And in it, I said that like, it's the most horrifying, like just devastating finish in a sports event I'd ever witnessed. And that like, you could hear a pin drop and people were crying at the gate. Like they were just totally moved and overtaken by emotion watching this guy fail in real time in front of us, and how devastating that was. And meaningful it was for him, and how it was just so heart-wrenching, like watching this guy just getting his soul trampled in real time.
And they said, but his time was okay, because he said he started crying and saying that he, took a wrong turn and he was just devastated by the wrong turn. But someone had yelled out like, but the time, he got it under the time. And Laz was like, nope, 6 seconds late. We're like, okay. Yeah. I just felt, it was so harsh to watch that ending. I just felt for him. I would have been devastated as well.
So, I feel bad for Gary, because he just sunk so much of his life into this. And then he came back the next year and got terrible weather conditions and made it through 3 loops and then had to tap out and he was the only one out there. And it was just, I think he was just running on spite at that point. And it was amazing he got that far in 2017. And then after that, he called it quits. But all this to say, that moment was the second sort of elevating moment for this event, and got global reach and people were fascinated by it. And then there was sort of like drips and drabs of like YouTubers and social media people, and CNN came one year, and, a couple of different kind of prestige magazines came and had people write features on it. Like I hung around with a guy from Esquire one year who was writing about it. National sports channel like ESPN, and in Canada, I think it was Sportsnet or TSN did a 30-minute short documentary on it. So you started seeing more and more media showing up and wanting to tell that story. And then obviously last year with Jasmine Paris finishing, that
yeah, of course,
elevated it even further. So I think those are your three moments that got us to where we are with this event.
I wonder if the Barkley started this year, it could become as big as it has become. And I think a good benchmark that we'll have, or a good comparator that we might have this year, if we accept the premise that the magic of the Barkley is inside of the storytelling, is this Grand Slam track league, which is nothing like the Barkley. In no way would I compare it, because you have world-class track and field athletes competing for teams, like non-national teams, and scoring points and competing against each other as an alternative to your regular World Athletics Championships and Diamond League Championships. And the founder is Michael Johnson, the famous U.S. Olympian 400-meter runner and 200-meter runner, former current record holder. And I have a sense that because it's so talked about on social media, much because of him, this league is trying to tell a really good story. They're trying to put the athletes first. They're trying to create a whole lot of content around it. And I wonder if it's going to pick up like the Barkley picked up. Are we too fragmented in our attention to really care at this point, is what I'm wondering?
I don't wonder, and this is a question I don't think any of us can answer, but we can try. I don't wonder if, you got me thinking here, if the Barkley were started in 2025, would it succeed? Would it become what it has become over a 30 whatever year period, 40-year period? I don't think it's possible in 2025 to start an event like this and have the success level unless you stay with these very strict guardrails of staying off social media for the most part, staying away from sponsorship and money opportunities for the most part, rebelling, sort of like having a phobia of marketing and of self-promotion. We live in an era of like everything is permitted when it comes to self-promotion. And this event has very carefully not sold out, to use a Gen X term here, like a 90s term, selling out. Like when I say to you, Katelyn, when I say that like the UTMB is a sellout race, you'd be like,
yeah.
As a 40 something, you're like, you react to that as like, you're like, yeah, it's like I can list to you like 90s bands that I think were sellout bands. And then the big question is, was Nirvana a sellout band, right? Did they sell out? That is not a concept that is in the lexicon of a millennial, or certainly not a Gen Z kid these days, right? Because there's no such thing as selling out anymore, because it's this antiquated idea. It's almost seen as like naive and silly to even talk about whether or not you're a sellout in 2025.
Yeah,
but the Barkley hasn't sold out.
Right.
They haven't. Like, if they really wanted to stick to that concept of no marketing, they would have refused all of those documentaries and
absolutely
the pieces.
True. You're right.
So they do have that Kawhi Leonard effect to them, right? The basketball player who blazed through Toronto and led the Toronto Raptors to a title. He signed big endorsement deals because his image was the opposite of every other basketball player. He didn't want the limelight, and that made him more compelling, I think. I think the Barkley has a bit of that. And it's also deeply countercultural, which I think will just attract people no matter what. Like, I have a good friend who lives and breathes the Barkley exactly because it doesn't cost to get in, and the founder smokes cigarettes, and the course is sometimes forwards and sometimes backwards, and it's nothing like the regular race. That's what he likes, and I
Nothing
know that there's people
conventional.
who like that. Exactly. The complete anti-race.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think we can cap it at that, because I feel like we could talk. This is like definite, and it has been in the past for me, certainly definite, like sitting at the bar over a couple of beers type conversation where you can just go on and on about this event forever, but we'll cap it at that. And I should say, so we're recording, it's 4:13 p.m. Eastern time. This event this year, it started at 11:37, the latest start ever. And it's now, we're like, we're well past, we are going into almost 30 hours of the event taking place. There are a few runners on lap 3, including John Kelly. Although I don't mean to be Debbie Downer here and negative about this, but like, if any of these runners that are still on the course is able to finish this year's event, it would be a miracle, because this is the latest they've ended loop 1. It's the latest they've started loop 2. It's going to be the latest they've ever finished loop 2 and gone into loop 3 as well. So I think we're probably going to see another year where the course wins out over the humans running on it. Anyway, guys, that was the Barkley Marathons. If something crazy and extraordinary happens, I will I'll pull someone together into the recording studio, and we will do an instant reaction podcast on the finish of the Barkley. Although I don't think we're going to get a dramatic finish this year.
This may not be the year.
Some DNFs, sadly. Okay, gang.
Don't subscribe to this podcast. Don't share it anywhere. And please go find a podcast about a major marathon that we've done and give it some love, please.
Reverse psychology.
Yes. Oh, we've got live. I mean, I'll just counter that by saying we're doing live updates on our site. We'll put a link in the show notes. If you want to continue to follow the Barkley pretty much live, we're scouring the internet and social media for every detail. I'm providing a lot of detail in terms of like what I know about the race and the course and my experience there, trying to provide as much like color commentary and insight as I can. It's kind of like watching like a sports event, and you've got color commentators.
And the live updates are quite awesome, I have to say. Michael's like he dug up some like LinkedIn profiles of some of the runners. It is top notch.
I love this stuff. I love the sort of like little like just I've not forgotten how to be an investigative journalist. I mean, I know it's just a bit of Googling, but there's some skills involved. So, all right. So yeah, follow us on our socials, follow what we're doing for the live updates. And we've got a live show coming up. I think we can talk about this now. We're doing a live show. We're doing a live show, Boston Marathon weekend in Boston.
On Newbury Street. This is fancy stuff.
On Newbury Street. I'm pretty sure we've got the venue locked. I don't want to say it just yet because I'm not sure if we've actually like confirmed, but I'm pretty sure we've got the venue locked. It's going to be on the Saturday. So the Boston Marathon is the Monday. Put it safely on Saturday, late afternoon. And have some snacks. I believe there will be an open bar, so you can ruin your marathon if you so wish. And we're going to be doing a live show. The 3 of us will be there live, and we're going to have some special guests. So we're going to have some very special guests, which I'm very excited about. We'll get into that next week. We'll talk about it in more detail and share with you how you can get on our exclusive guest list, because it's a limited engagement. All right, gang, until next week, hopefully you finish your next run, and that's an accomplishment in and of itself.